Hey guys, I'd like to continue on my topic of Islamic slavery. Literal slavery basically in Islam, and I'm gonna show you some verses, some actual verses that are out of the Quran that I looked at recently, and here it says Surah 2 verses 221, and it says, "Do not marry al-mushrikat, idolatresses, till they believe and worship in Allah alone. And indeed, a slave woman who believes is better than a free mushrikah, idolatresses, even though she pleases you." Wow. Even though she pleases you. So, slave so basically, even a believer in Islam can end up actually being a slave. So they can actually enslave their own fellow believers. Wow. I mean, that's what the verse is basically saying. I mean, it's insane, but a slave woman. Wow. So basically, if they can have their own slaves, and they can, with a slave, you can do as you please with a slave, right? From an evil sin, you can do as you please. There's no real moral grounds on that, So because I've been hearing like certain things like that about Muhammad, like he once married some what was it, like a 9-year-old girl or something like that he had for a wife at one point, which isn't surprising, even though I haven't looked into that. But I don't need to, because with a verse that says here that it's perfectly okay for him to have slaves, and a slave woman is better for him. If it's okay to have a slave, basically, then him marrying a 9-year-old girl is nothing, because this verse alone backs it up. As evil and sick as it is, this verse from their own religion basically backs it up. I mean, and indeed, a slave woman who believes is better than a free mushrika, an idolatress, even though she pleases you. Again, if you look at the parameters of what pleases you can mean, well, I guess you can use your own imagination to it. I mean, it's pretty insane, but because if you can have a slave, guess what? Say you have a slave and the slave's a kid. Guess what? The kid's a slave. A slave's a slave, regardless of how old the person is, right? So you can actually see how sickening it is, because I've been hearing that, oh, they're married little girls. They're so young. They don't even have the concept of what sex is, much less marriage and all this other stuff. And there's even actual verses in the Quran. I think I've seen them before, but the slavery, if you can have a slave woman basically, and she can please you however I guess you feel, then marrying a 9-year-old girl is nothing, because this slavery thing basically backs it up. It's kind of like, well, if you can have a slave, then marrying a child is basically nothing, because I mean, you know you understand what I'm saying here? I mean, it's pretty insane, so that you see how easily the pedophilia can just creep in, because you understand the parameter of what the verse is actually saying. I mean, the lowest levels of morality can just sneak right in, you know and it's a continuation of that. It's an actual verse here, and it's saying, a believing slave is better than a free mushrik idolater, even though he pleases you. Wow. So, wow. I mean that this is Surah 2 verses 221. If you want to look at an actual Quran for yourself, a believing slave is better than a free mushrik, even though he pleases you. So wow, well, no, homosexuality can't even creep in here because say he has a slave. I mean, you see how sick things can get really quickly. I mean, so basically, you can, because again, like I said, a slave is a slave. You know, you have them in bondage. You know, they basically have to do as you please, basically. You know, or you can force them at the very least. You know, so I mean, so basically, those guys they can, I guess, secretly be gay and then have their own religion to back it up. You know. I mean, it's sick, but hey, it's in their own Quran, you know. And and believe me, I've read the verses before and after this, so there's nothing saying, oh, it was a bad thing or that was in the past. It's saying like it's nothing basically, you know. Even though he pleases you, woohoo, man, I'm not. Wow. And they're like, we're so peaceful and moral and just, and yet their own Quran basically allows slavery. Sorry, that's just insane. And here's this one, Surah 33 verse 52, and it's saying, and again, you know what? It is not lawful for you to marry other women after this in order to change them for otherwise, even though their beauty attracts you, except those captives or slaves whom your right hand possesses. Wow. I mean, you see how sick things get near your right hand possesses, and he's claiming that he's of God or whatever. Well, but then again, you know, yeah, people have their own deities that they worship, basically. But quite frankly, if this is the God that they're worshiping, well, I mean, it just sounds like a sick, perverted God to me. You know, with his own twisted version of righteousness. I mean, hell, even we know better than that, and yet, well, again, hey, freedom of religion, right? You know, I mean, do you see the sick parameters that it gives you? You know, I mean, in the last part, I gave you, you know, the beating of their own wives and women and I mean this and that. So on the news, every time, it seems like every couple of days they come and say, oh, this woman over in Sudan or in the Middle East, oh, she was beaten or something for not wearing her hijab or not going for walking without a man by her side or something like that. Well, if you have a verse in there that says you can beat your own wife if you see her behavior unfit in your own eyes, then that's nothing basically, you know. I mean, it's just another day in the life of being Islamic, you know. But I think, but the Muslims over here in the West, because they got the law, that's it, you know, domestic abuse is not right, and you can get thrown in prison for that and all of that stuff. So they kind of use that as their sort of defense against their own religion. Kind of ironic, really, you know. It's kind of ironic, but with verses like this, I'm just, in my mind, I'm still wondering, what woman, at the very least, what woman would even want to join in this thing? I mean, I just don't even understand it. But then again, you know, it says you can you're supposed to kill unbelievers. So basically, once you join in this, you're basically stuck in it. Especially if you're in, I guess, a place like Iran or something. But, you know, because say a woman, she says like, oh,